Wilhelmina Dalton pressed her ticket so hard against her palm that the paper bent. 22 years old, and already the town of Hawthorne had decided she was nothing. She was walking away from the rejection, the humiliation, the summer dust that clung to her skirts like shame. She had one foot on that train step when a hand firm, certain, unapologetic closed around her arm and pulled her back into a life she hadn't chosen yet. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow Willa's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, which Willa would later decide was the cruelest detail of the whole affair, that something capable of destroying a person's carefully built hope would choose a Tuesday to do it an ordinary, unremarkable day that deserved nothing so dramatic. She read it twice. Then she folded it in half, slid it into the pocket of her work dress, and went back to correcting the spelling exercises she'd been reviewing for the school board's final consideration. She corrected every last paper before she let herself feel a single thing. That was Willa Dalton's way. Finish the work first. Fall apart later in private where no one could measure the damage. The letter was from Mr. Harold Greer, chairman of the Hawthorne Township School Committee. It contained 4 paragraphs and one devastating sentence buried in the third one, like a stone in soft bread. We have determined that the position requires a candidate of more suitable temperament and presentation. Temperament. Presentation. She knew what those words meant. She'd heard their cousins her entire life wrapped in polite smiles and careful voices. Too loud, too much, too big, takes up too much room. Has too many opinions for a woman of her, and here they'd pause search for the charitable word, Constitution. Willa was 22 years old, and she was done. She packed her trunk that same evening. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house on Elm Street and had the particular gift of knowing everything that happened in Hawthorne before it happened to the person it was happening to, knocked on Willa's door at 7:30. "I heard about the committee's decision," Mrs. Patterson said. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried no nonsense in either direction. "I'm sorry, child." "I'm not a child," Willa said, not unkindly. She kept folding her blouses. "And you don't need to be sorry. I made a mistake coming here. I'm correcting it." "Where will you go?" "East. Back to my aunt's in Maryland. She'll find me something useful to do, even if it's hemming curtains for the rest of my life." She pressed her lips together. "At least curtains don't write letters about my presentation." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're the best read woman in this county. I said that to Mr. Greer myself not 2 weeks ago." "And what did he say?" The older woman didn't answer, which was answer enough. Willa closed the trunk lid. "Train leaves at 10 tomorrow morning. I'd appreciate if you'd keep my room deposit. I know it's short notice." "I'll do no such thing," Mrs. Patterson said. "You keep every cent. And Willa—" She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, those children would have loved you." Willa didn't answer that either, because the truth was, she would have loved them right back, and that particular grief was too fresh to speak out loud. The Hawthorne train station on a summer morning was a miserable, beautiful, sun-blasted place. Heat rose off the platform boards in visible waves, and the air smelled of coal smoke and dry earth and something faintly floral that Willa could never identify, some desert bloom, stubborn enough to survive in the gravel alongside the tracks. She arrived 40 minutes early, which was also her way. Better to wait in dignity than to rush in desperation. Her trunk had been loaded. She had her ticket. She had the address of her aunt's house written on a folded paper in her coat pocket next to the letter from Mr. Greer, which she had decided to keep as a reminder. Of what exactly she hadn't determined yet. Possibly just that the world was capable of being small and stupid, and she should never again be surprised by that. 3 women from the Ladies' Auxiliary were clustered near the station door, fanning themselves and talking in the quiet, efficient way of people who are saying something they don't want overheard. Willa recognized 2 of them. One, Mrs. Clara Hofstede, had been present at her teaching demonstration 3 weeks ago and had smiled the entire time, the kind of smile that means absolutely nothing. Willa walked past them without acknowledgement. "Poor dear," she heard one of them murmur, pitched just loud enough. She really did think they'd take her. Willa kept walking. She found a spot at the far end of the platform, set her bag at her feet, and turned her face toward the eastern horizon where the tracks disappeared into shimmer and distance. The train wasn't visible yet. She had 36 minutes. She was fine. She was absolutely fine. She was not going to cry on the platform of the Hawthorne train station in front of the ladies' auxiliary, and whichever other citizens of this town had decided to make this Tuesday morning their business. She was watching the horizon so fixedly that she didn't hear him approach. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't feel the need to rush toward its point. She turned. He was tall. She registered that first, then the hat, a wide-brimmed thing that cast his face in partial shade even in the full morning light. Dark brown hair. Gray eyes that were doing the thing eyes sometimes did when they were actually paying attention rather than simply looking. He was dressed for ranch work, not for town leather. Vest-worn boots, a bandana looped at his collar, but he was holding his hat in his hands in the manner of a man who had been taught that certain situations required it. "I don't think I know you," Willa said, because that seemed like the factual place to start. "No, ma'am. Daniel Walker. I work the Callaway Spread Northwest Quarter." He tilted his head slightly toward the hat in his hands. "I've seen you in town. A few times." And he blinked once like that directness surprised him slightly, but not unpleasantly. "And I heard you're leaving." News does travel fast in a town with nothing better to do. "It does," he agreed without any defensiveness. "I also heard why." Willa turned back to the horizon. "Then you know everything there is to know. I appreciate you coming to say whatever it is you came to say. Good morning, Mr. Walker." He didn't move. She gave it 10 full seconds, then looked back at him. He was still standing there, hat in both hands, watching her with those gray eyes that were doing the paying attention thing with notable persistence. "Is there something else?" she asked. "I was wondering," he said, "if you'd consider staying." The words landed in the hot summer air between them with a quietness that was somehow louder than noise. Willa stared at him. "I'm sorry. I know that's an odd thing to say to someone you don't know." He wasn't flustered exactly, but he was choosing his words with the care of a man who knew he was crossing into territory he hadn't entirely mapped. "But I've seen you around town, like I said. I've seen how you are with people, how you talk to May Chin at the laundry and the Reyes children on 4th Street. I've seen you at the library and at the church social, even though I could see you didn't particularly want to be there. Is this a character testimony?" "No, ma'am." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. I suppose it's a request." "A request. Give this town a little longer. He paused, and she had the impression he was revising something he'd originally planned to say. "Give me a chance to show you that not everyone here thinks the way that committee does." Willa looked at him for a long moment. The train whistle sounded in the distance, still far, but there, real, coming. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I have a ticket in my hand." "I see that." "I have a trunk on that platform." "I see that too." "I have an aunt in Maryland who is expecting me." "That one I didn't know," he said. "I'm sorry to add to her disappointment." Despite herself, despite everything, something pulled at the corner of Willa's own mouth. She pressed it back down. "This is an extraordinarily unusual conversation. I won't argue that point. You're asking me to stay in a town that just told me in writing that my presentation makes me unfit to teach its children." Something changed in his expression then. It wasn't anger precisely. It was the face a person makes when they hear something confirmed that they'd suspected and hoped wasn't true. His jaw tightened. His hands pressed slightly harder against the brim of his hat. "That's a shameful thing," he said quietly. "And I'd say that to Mr. Greer's face." "Would you?" "Have done as a matter of fact, this morning." She hadn't expected that. Something shifted in her chest, a small shift barely measurable but real. "Why?" Because it was shameful, he said, as if the answer were that simple. And because I'd made up my mind to come here and say what I'm saying, and I didn't think I ought to do that without being honest about what I thought of the circumstances. Willa looked at the train ticket in her hand. The edges were bent where she'd been gripping it. The train whistle called again, closer now, and the platform was beginning to stir with the small motions of departure, porters moving, families gathering, the ladies' auxiliary, drifting toward the edge of the platform like curious birds. "What exactly are you asking me?" she said. Plainly, no roundabout. He met her eyes. "I'm asking if you'd let me court you, properly, with every intention of seeing where it leads." He paused. "I'm also asking if you'd be willing to trust that this town has more good in it than the committee showed you. And I'll admit, those might be two different questions." "They are two very different questions." "I know. And you're asking them both at once. I figured I only had however long until that train arrived," he said, "and I didn't want to waste the time on the one that matters less." Willa felt something she hadn't felt in some days, a sensation she couldn't quite name immediately, and then she felt seen. Not measured, not assessed for suitability of temperament and presentation, seen. It was a disorienting feeling. She didn't entirely trust it. "I don't know you, Mr. Walker." "No, ma'am. I have no reason to believe your intentions are what you say they are." "That's fair." "I have no employment, no income, and no certainty of any kind if I step off this platform." "Also fair." "And you," she said, "are a ranch hand who introduced himself 3 minutes ago and is asking me to redirect my entire life on the basis of a hat in your hands and a handful of observations." "That's a precise summary," he allowed. "Though I'd add I'm a ranch hand who also had a word with Harold Greer before breakfast, if that counts for anything." She looked at him. He looked back. The train was audible now, a true sound, not a whistle. The grinding mechanical certainty of something large moving toward them with no interest in anyone's private decisions. Mrs. Hofstede said something behind her. She didn't hear the words. She didn't try to. Willa looked down at her ticket one more time. She thought about the letter in her pocket, and the folded address of her aunt's house, and the life that was waiting for her in Maryland, hemming curtains, she'd said. She'd meant it as a small cruelty toward herself, but now she found herself considering it with genuine sobriety. Was that what she was walking toward? A safe, manageable, quiet life in which no one would ever again write her a letter about her presentation, because no one would be asking anything of her at all. She thought about the children she'd seen on 4th Street, the Reyes kids who ran errands for 3 families to help their mother make ends meet, and who had stopped once to ask her what the word fortitude meant, and she'd told them, and they'd repeated it to each other all the way down the block, like it was a gift she'd given them. "1 month," she said. Daniel Walker went very still. "I will stay 1 month," she said. "I will give the town 1 month. And I will give you." She looked at him with the same steady frankness she gave every situation. "The opportunity to demonstrate that your character matches your words." She held up a single finger. 1 month. At the end of which I reserve every right to walk back to this platform and board whatever train is going east, and you will not stand in my way." "Agreed," he said immediately without hesitation. "And Mr. Walker?" "Yes, ma'am." "If you are anything other than what you presented yourself as just now, I will know it. I've made a study of disappointment, and I've gotten rather good at recognizing it early." He looked at her with those gray eyes, the paying attention ones, and said, "I'd expect nothing less." Mei Chin was the first person to tell her she'd made either the best or worst decision of her life, and she offered both options with equal cheerfulness, which was one of the things Willa liked best about her. "Which does he look like?" May asked, threading a needle with the focused efficiency of someone who could do 12 things at once. "The best or worst kind? I genuinely don't know yet." "Callaway spread, you said. That's solid work. Callaway doesn't keep men who cause trouble. I'd know his wife and I have an arrangement about her laundry." "That's remarkably practical information." "I am a remarkably practical person." May bit the thread off cleanly. "He came to the station before breakfast, you said. He was up early thinking about you." He was up early confronting Harold Greer apparently. May went quiet for half a moment, which was significant because May was rarely quiet. He did what? Said he'd spoken to Greer about the committee's decision. Daniel Walker. May turned the name over like she was checking it for quality. Gray eyes, dark hair, usually got a bay horse. I couldn't speak to the horse. That's him. He's been coming to town for 2 seasons. Quiet, polite. Tips his hat to my grandmother, which... She pointed the needle for emphasis. Very few men in this county do. He tipped his hat to me, Willa said. Then he thinks you're worth tipping his hat to. May went back to her sewing. In my experience, that's not nothing. Willa sat with that a moment. She looked out the laundry window at the summer sky, enormous and indifferent and very, very blue. 1 month. She had 1 month. She intended to make every single day of it count. He came to find her the next morning. Not at Mrs. Patterson's, she noted this later, the correctness of it, but at the library, where May had let it be known that Willa could often be found. He appeared in the doorway with his hat in his hands, same as before, and said, I wasn't sure you'd still be here. I said 1 month, she told him without looking up from her book. It's been 14 hours. Fair enough. He came a few steps into the room, looked at the shelves with what appeared to be genuine interest and said, You picked a good town for libraries at least. Mrs. Alcott keeps a solid collection. Willa looked up at that. You use the library? Is that surprising? She considered him the ranch clothes, the working man's hands, the hat he was turning slow circles with. Somewhat, she admitted. My mother taught school, he said. In Colorado. She had opinions about libraries. Something in Willa's chest shifted again, that same quiet realignment. She filed it away to examine later. What did she teach? She asked. Everything, Willa, he said. It was a one-room school. A pause. She would have fought Harold Greer herself. Willa held his gaze for a moment. Outside, a wagon rolled past, and the summer heat poured through the open doorway, and somewhere on the next street over, a child was calling for someone with the cheerful insistence of someone who has unlimited energy and no concept of indoor voices. Sit down, Mr. Walker, she said, and tell me about Colorado. He sat down, and for the first time in what felt like a very long season, Wilhelmina Dalton did not feel like leaving. Colorado, he told her, was nothing like Nevada. He said it the way people say things they've carried a long time, not with drama, but with the particular weight of a fact that has had years to settle into bone. He'd grown up in a small town outside of Pueblo, second of 4 children, son of a schoolteacher, mother, and a father who worked cattle until the cattle work ran out. When the ranch closed, his father went east looking for mill work and found something else. Instead, Willa didn't press on that, and Daniel didn't offer it, and his mother kept the school running on donations and her own stubbornness for 2 more years before the county pulled the funding. She taught until the last day, he said. Walked in, wrote the lesson on the board, taught it. Walked out when the bell rang. Went home and cried for about a week. My sisters said I was already gone by then, working my first ranch job up near Trinidad. How old were you? 16, babe. Willa looked at him across the library table. Outside, someone was arguing loudly about the price of dry goods. Inside, Mrs. Alcott was making soft organizational sounds behind the shelves. The summer heat pressed against the windows, like it was trying to get a look at them. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Willa said. She is. He said it in present tense, and she noted that. She's still in Pueblo. Writes me letters about the neighbors and the weather and what's growing in her garden, and sometimes she slips in a question about whether I've met anyone worth knowing. He paused. I think I'll have something to tell her this week. Willa held that for a moment. She was not a woman who blushed easily. Her complexion didn't cooperate, and her disposition wasn't built for it, but she felt the warmth of the sentence land somewhere just below her sternum and stay there. Don't tell her too much, she said. I've only agreed to 1 month, and I'd hate to raise expectations. She raised 4 children mostly alone, Daniel said. She has practical expectations. That surprised a laugh out of Willa, a real one, not the polite social kind. He looked at the sound of it with something that was either satisfaction or relief, and possibly both. It was a reasonable beginning. The reasonable beginning got complicated by Thursday. Thursday was when Mrs. Clara Hofstede decided that Willa's continued presence in Hawthorne was a matter requiring community comment. And Mrs. Hofstede was a woman who expressed community comment the way other people expressed weather comprehensively, and with no particular concern for who got wet. Willa was at the general store calculating whether her remaining funds could survive another week without her aunt's address entering the picture when she heard it. Not directed at her, Mrs. Hofstede was speaking to Mrs. Dell behind the fabric bolts in the carrying voice of someone who has never once in her life considered lowering it. She's been seen at the library with Daniel Walker, twice now. Clara Reese saw them yesterday afternoon and again this morning. Is that so? Mrs. Dell's voice was the careful kind, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just oiling the mechanism. I don't say the girl isn't well-intentioned. The pause before well-intentioned did considerable work. But she failed the committee's review, and Daniel Walker is a fine young man with a future ahead of him. I simply think, is there something you needed, Mrs. Hofstede? The voice was Willa's. She came around the fabric bolts with her basket and her chin at the exact angle she'd learned from 10 years of being discussed in rooms she was expected not to hear. Mrs. Hofstede went the particular color of a woman caught doing exactly what she was doing. Miss Dalton, I didn't realize. No, Willa agreed pleasantly. You didn't. Can I help you find anything? I seem to know this store reasonably well after 2 weeks in town, even for someone of unsuitable presentation. Mrs. Dell made a sound behind her hand that might have been a cough. Mrs. Hofstede drew herself up. I was simply expressing concern. For Daniel Walker. Yes, I heard. Willa set her basket on the counter with a sound that was not quite a slam, but adjacent to one. Mr. Walker is a grown man who makes his own decisions, Mrs. Hofstede. I'd imagine he'd find your concern for his welfare rather surprising, since he didn't ask for it. She paused. Good morning. She paid for her things. She walked out. She made it exactly half a block before her hands started shaking. Not from fear, she was clear on that, but from the effort of containing everything she had actually wanted to say, which was considerably more than what she'd said, and considerably less charitable. That was well done. She turned. Daniel was leaning against the post outside the hardware store, arms crossed, the expression on his face somewhere between admiration and suppressed amusement. Willa stared at him. Were you there? Long enough. For which part? The part where you told Clara Hofstede that a grown man doesn't require her supervision. He straightened, fell into step beside her without asking if that was acceptable, which she found she didn't object to. She's going to talk about you for a week. She was going to talk about me regardless. True. He glanced sideways at her. You all right? My hands are shaking. I see that. It's not fear. I know it isn't. She looked at him. How do you know? Because you didn't shake when you said it. You shook after. He held her gaze with those steady gray eyes. That's what righteous anger does. It holds itself together until the moment passes, and then it lets you know what it cost. Willa was quiet for a moment. They were walking without direction, which she also didn't object to. Your mother taught you that, she asked. My mother lived it, he said, every day for 2 years while the county committee met to discuss the funding. He paused. Different committee. Same kind of meeting. Something old and angry moved through Willa's chest, and then quieted the way a fire settles when it finds something to rest against. She breathed out slowly. I would have liked to have met her, she said. Your mother. I'll tell her you said so. You're going to write her about me this week, aren't you? Already drafted it in my head, he said. And then, because he was apparently a man who knew exactly when to stop talking, he said nothing else, and they walked the rest of the block in the kind of silence that doesn't require filling. What Hawthorne made of Wilhelmina Dalton in those first 2 weeks depended almost entirely on who in Hawthorne you were asking. The ladies' auxiliary, or at least its more vocal members, had formed a view that was largely unflattering and surprisingly unanimous for a group of women who disagreed about everything else, including the correct hour for Sunday services. They found her too direct, too opinionated, too comfortable with the space she occupied. Mrs. Hofstede had added "too familiar with Daniel Walker" to the list after Thursday, and that item seemed to be generating the most interest. The other camp, quieter, more spread out but present, held a different opinion. Rosa Reyes, whose children Willa had known by sight before she knew their names, knocked on the boarding house door on a Friday afternoon, with a plate of pan dulce and a directness that matched Willa's own. "My son told me you explained a word to him once," she said. "Fortitude." "I remember," Willa said. "He used it in a sentence last week that made his teacher stop class." Rosa held out the plate. "I wanted to say thank you, and if you're staying, Mateo and Lucia could use someone patient for reading. I can't pay much." Willa looked at the plate. She looked at Rosa Reyes, who was watching her with the eyes of a woman who had made 100 practical calculations before making this one and knew the difference between charity and investment. "I don't need pay," Willa said. "I need something useful to do. What time does Mateo finish his chores?" Rosa Reyes smiled, and it was the kind of smile that rearranged the whole conversation. They started Monday. By Wednesday, there were 3 children around Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table. By Friday, there were 5, including the 2 youngest Chin grandchildren, because May had mentioned the arrangement to her grandmother, and her grandmother had mentioned it to approximately 14 people. Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway of her own kitchen on that Friday afternoon and watched 5 children bent over papers with the fierce concentration of people who had been told that words were important and had believed it, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to need a bigger table." Willa looked up. "I can find another location." "I said bigger table, not different house." Mrs. Patterson disappeared in the direction of the back porch. "Thomas Alcott has a folding one he never uses." Tugged. Daniel heard about the kitchen school from May Chin, who heard about it from her grandmother, who had apparently included in her detailed account the information that Willa had stayed until nearly 7 o'clock, helping Mateo Reyes work through a passage in a reader that was 2 grades above his current level because he'd asked if he could try it. He showed up at Mrs. Patterson's on Saturday morning with a box of chalk and 2 slates. Willa opened the door, took one look at the box and said, "Where did you get these?" "Hardware store had them in the back." Alcott didn't know what to do with them. He held out the box. Thought they might be useful. She took the box from him. She looked at the slates, then at him. "You went to the hardware store for chalk," she said. "Among other things. Daniel Walker." She said his name with the precision of someone who is performing a genuine assessment in real time. "What is it you're actually doing here?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone buying time, the silence of someone who is being careful with something true. "I told you at the station," he said. "I meant it." "You meant you wanted to court me?" "Yes. And in your understanding of courting, that includes," she gestured at the box, "procurement of educational supplies." "In my understanding of courting," he said, "it includes paying attention to who a person actually is and acting accordingly." He met her eyes. "You're a teacher, Willa. It doesn't matter what Harold Greer's letter said. So I brought chalk." She stood there holding a box of chalk and 2 slates on a Saturday morning in the Nevada summer heat and experienced for the second time in her life the precise sensation of being entirely seen. It was even more disorienting the second time. "Come in," she said. Mrs. Patterson made coffee. It was Rosa Reyes who first told Willa about the land. She mentioned it sideways in the way of someone who isn't sure if a piece of information belongs in a conversation but can't quite keep it out. They were at Mrs. Patterson's table on a Tuesday afternoon, the children gone sharing coffee in the quiet that followed 5 children in an enclosed space. "There's a property," Rosa said, turning her cup in her hands. "East of the Callaway spread, about 60 acres. Used to belong to an old man named Hector Vale. He died last spring, no family close enough to claim it. The county's been sitting on it." "I heard something about that," Mrs. Patterson said from the stove. There's talk, Rosa continued, that someone's been talking to the county assessor about acquiring it for back taxes. She said the word acquiring with a precise flatness that communicated clearly what she thought of the process. Hector had a verbal arrangement with 3 families, including mine, about grazing rights on the south parcel. Nothing written, just his word and ours. Willa put her cup down. And if someone acquires it, the verbal arrangements disappear. Rosa's jaw was tight. We've been grazing on that south parcel for 4 years. It's the only reason we've kept the stock we have. A pause. I don't know yet who's doing the talking, but the assessor's name is Greer. The name landed on the table like a dropped stone. Willa looked at Rosa. Harold Greer. His brother, James Greer. Rosa met her eyes. I don't know that the two are connected. I'm not a woman who assumes. But I thought you should know since you've, she paused, made a study of the Greers one way or another. Mrs. Patterson set down her pot with considerably more force than necessary. She said nothing, which in her particular language was the loudest possible statement. Willa sat with this information and turned it carefully, the way she turned everything, looking at its edges, its implications, the places where it connected to other things she knew. The school committee, the letter, suitable temperament and presentation. Harold Greer's face when she'd addressed the committee the particular way his eyes had moved over her and decided something before she'd spoken a single word. His brother, the county assessor. 3 families and 60 acres and nothing in writing. Who else knows about this? She asked. The 3 families involved. May's family has a grazing arrangement on the north parcel. I haven't spoken to her grandmother yet. Rosa looked at her hands. And I suspect Daniel Walker knows something. He works the Callaway land, and Callaway's east fence runs right along the Vale property line. Does Daniel know you're telling me this? No. Rosa looked up. But I'm telling you because you're the smartest person I've found in this town who isn't already somebody's cousin or somebody's debtor. She said it with complete simplicity. And because Mateo used the word fortitude in a sentence, and I believe in paying debts. Willa told Daniel that evening on the front porch of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, where the summer heat had finally grudgingly begun to concede to the slightly less brutal temperature of early evening. She told him everything Rosa had said, in order, without editorializing, and watched his face while she did it. He listened the way he did most things, completely without interruption, his expression not flat, but controlled. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. I know about the land, he said. I thought you might. Callaway knows too. He's been watching the assessor's office. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. The Vale property's been the subject of quiet conversation for about 6 weeks. Nobody's moved officially yet, but there are people positioned to move fast when someone does. James Greer, and at least one other name I haven't confirmed. His jaw was doing the same thing Rosa's had done. The problem is the verbal arrangements. No documentation, no legal standing. When the sale goes through, if it goes through, those families lose access overnight. Then we need documentation, Willa said. He looked at her. I'm not a lawyer, she said before he could respond, but I've read enough legal text in enough library collections to know that a signed statement from multiple parties attesting to the existence and terms of a verbal arrangement carries weight when presented to the right people. She paused. And I know how to write a document that sounds like it means exactly what it says. Daniel was very still. There's a territorial judge, he said slowly, who comes through Hawthorne every 6 weeks for circuit court. He's due in, he calculated, 11 days. Then we have 11 days. Willa. He said her name with the particular weight of someone trying to make sure the person they're talking to understands what they're agreeing to. If James Greer is connected to Harold Greer and you start making noise about this, then Harold Greer will be annoyed, she said. He's already written me a letter about my presentation. I don't think my opinion of his opinion has room to decline further. Something moved across Daniel's face, something fierce and warm, and not entirely suppressible. You understand this could make things harder, he said. For you, in this town, Mr. Walker. She met his eyes squarely. I stayed in this town because you asked me to give it a chance, and because I believed there was something worth staying for. I'm now looking at something worth staying about. She leaned forward slightly. Are you with me or not? The pause before he answered was not long. But it was real, and she respected him for it, for not answering faster than the weight of the question deserved. I'm with you, he said. Good. She stood, straightened her skirts, moved toward the door. I'll start the documentation tomorrow. Tell Calloway we'll need his testimony as well verbal agreements on his end of the fence line count. Willa. She turned. He was looking at her with those gray eyes, the paying attention ones fully deployed. The month isn't up, he said. Just so you know, you've got, he calculated with a slight tilt of his head, 19 days. I'm aware, she said. Are you still counting? She looked at him for a long moment. The evening air sat between them warm and still, and full of whatever this thing was that had been building since a train platform and a hat held in two careful hands. I'll let you know when I stop, she said. And she went inside before either of them could say anything else, which was the wisest decision she'd made all week. Mei Chin's grandmother was 73 years old, had crossed an ocean and a continent, and did not, as she informed Willa through May's translation, have patience for dishonest men or cold tea. She also had, it turned out, a remarkably clear memory of the day Hector Vale had shaken hands with her son-in-law on the north parcel, and told him the grazing arrangement would hold for as long as the family needed it. She remembered what he was wearing. She remembered what the weather was like. She remembered the exact words because she'd repeated them to herself several times that week, storing them the way a practical woman stores anything valuable, carefully in a place she could find again. Willa wrote down everything she said word for word with May, translating, and occasionally adding her own precise annotations. Then she read it back. Mrs. Chin listened, asked May 2 questions, received 2 answers, and nodded once with the authority of a woman closing a matter. She says that's correct, May said. She says sign her name where you need it, and she'll put her mark. Tell her I'm grateful, May translated. Mrs. Chin responded. She says don't be grateful yet, May said. Be correct, then be grateful. Willa looked at the old woman across the table and felt something move through her, something that was partly admiration and partly recognition, and partly the sensation of understanding clearly and fully why she was here and what she was doing. Tell her I'll be both, Willa said. By the end of the week, she had 4 signed statements, 2 witness testimonies, and a letter from Thomas Calloway, written by Daniel at Calloway's direction, because Calloway's formal writing, as Daniel put it diplomatically, was a work in progress, attesting to the history of the boundary arrangements on the east fence line. She also had on Friday afternoon a visitor she hadn't expected. The knock at Mrs. Patterson's front door was not a polite knock. It was the knock of someone who has decided that doors are a formality and knocking is a courtesy they're extending but not particularly feeling. Mrs. Patterson answered it. Willa heard the exchange from the parlor. She couldn't make out words, but she could make out tone, and the tone was not encouraging. Miss Dalton. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the parlor doorway with the expression of a woman who has seen considerable things in her life and has chosen on this occasion to let Willa handle this one. There's a Mr. James Greer at the door. He was shorter than she'd expected. She'd built him taller in her mind as one does with threats, and he had the eyes of a man who was accustomed to having conversations go the way he intended them to go. Miss Dalton, he said. He didn't remove his hat. I understand you've been collecting statements from certain families in the area. Good afternoon, Mr. Greer, Willa said. She stayed in the doorway of the parlor. She did not invite him further in. I'd like to know, he said, what exactly you think you're doing. Reading? Writing? Teaching children? She tilted her head. Is there a specific activity that concerns you? His jaw tightened. You're involving yourself in a property matter that doesn't concern you. Several families have asked me to help them document arrangements that directly affect their livelihoods, she said. That concerns me considerably. Those arrangements have no legal standing. They will have considerably more standing in 11, she corrected herself, 9 days when Judge Harlan arrives for circuit court. Something moved behind his eyes, fast and cold and not pleasant to see. "You're new here," he said. "You don't understand how things work in this county." "I understand," Willa said with perfect steadiness, "how land acquisition for unpaid taxes works. I understand the notification requirements and the redemption period provisions. I've read the territorial statutes on the matter." She paused. "Have you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You failed the school board review," he said. It was a pivot, sudden, deliberate, meant to land like a slap. "My brother's committee." "Yes," she said. "I'm aware. Your brother found my presentation unsuitable." She held his gaze without flinching. "Funny thing about suitable presentation, Mr. Greer, it tends to matter a great deal less when you're standing in front of a territorial judge with 4 signed testimonies and a copy of the relevant statutes." James Greer left without another word. Willa closed the door, walked back to the parlor table, sat down and put her face in her hands for approximately 30 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. She had 9 days. The families had been grazing that land for 4 years. Mateo Reyes had used the word fortitude in a sentence. She had every intention of earning it. 9 days was not a long time. Willa knew this the way she knew most things, not from being told, but from direct personal experience, with the gap between what a person intends and what time actually allows. She had learned as a child that hope has a tendency to expand to fill available space, and that deadlines have a tendency to arrive before the space is ready. She worked anyway. The documentation was cleaner than she'd expected, which was partly because the families themselves were meticulous in ways that surprised her. Rosa Reyes had kept every note Hector Vale had ever sent, her small folded papers practical and brief, in an old man's cramped handwriting, but clear. May's grandmother had her memory. Thomas Calloway once Daniel explained what was needed and why produced a hand-drawn map of the boundary arrangements that was more precise than anything Willa could have asked for. What she had by Sunday evening was a package of documentation that she believed genuinely, not hopefully, would hold up in front of Judge Harlan. What she did not have was certainty that Judge Harlan would see it before James Greer moved. He went to the assessor's office on Saturday, Daniel told her. He came to Mrs. Patterson's directly from Calloway's, still in his work clothes, and sat at the kitchen table with the bearing of a man who has bad news and is not going to delay delivering it. 2 other men were with him. I don't know both names, but one of them was Alderman Potts. "Potts," Mrs. Patterson said from the stove. She said it the way you'd say spoiled milk. "He has standing with the county," Daniel continued. "If he's attached to the acquisition, it moves faster through the administrative process." "How much faster?" Willa asked. Greer could file the acquisition claim as early as Tuesday. Willa looked at the stack of documents in front of her. "Judge Harlan arrives Thursday." "Yes." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. "Then we don't wait for Thursday," Willa said. "We get the documentation to Harlan before he arrives. He'll have a clerk. Most circuit judges travel with one. Is there a telegraph office in Hawthorne?" "On 2nd Street," Mrs. Patterson said. "Can we send the documentation ahead? A summary at least enough to establish prior notice of the contested arrangements before any acquisition claim is filed." Daniel looked at her. "You want to telegraph a judge?" "I want to telegraph a judge's clerk with a legally sufficient summary of 4 verbal land arrangements being threatened by what appears to be coordinated acquisition activity." "Yes." She paused. "Is that unusual?" "It's..." He stopped, started again. "I have never in my life met anyone like you." "Is that a yes or a no on the telegraph office?" "It's an absolutely yes," he said, and the expression on his face was doing something complicated and warm that she filed away to think about later, when the immediate crisis was not immediately upon her. The telegraph office on 2nd Street was operated by a man named Clarence Dupree, who was approximately 100 years old, or possibly 45, it was genuinely difficult to establish, and who regarded the arrival of Willa and Daniel at his counter on a Sunday evening with the expression of a man who has made peace with the unexpected. Willa gave him the summary she'd drafted on the walk over. He read it slowly, moving his lips slightly, then looked at her over the top of it. "This is going to Judge Harlan's circuit clerk." "Yes." "In Reno." "Yes." "On a Sunday." "The circumstances are time-sensitive, Mr. Dupree." He looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back at him with the expression of a man who has decided that the wisest thing he can do in this moment is let Willa handle it. Dupree sent the telegraph. Willa paid for it from the diminishing fund she was trying not to think about too carefully, and walked back out into the Sunday evening with the particular feeling of a person who has done what they can do and now must wait, which was the thing she was worst at. "You did everything you could," Daniel said, walking beside her. "I did everything I could today," she corrected. "Tomorrow, I'm going to the county records office to pull the original Vale property documentation. I want to know exactly when the tax arrears were established and whether the notification process followed the statutory requirements." He was quiet for a moment. "Willa." "Yes." "It's Sunday evening. The records office opens Monday morning." "I know. I meant—" He stopped walking. She stopped too and turned, and he was looking at her with the gray eyes and an expression that was not frustration, but something that lived very close to concern. "You've been working on this for 6 days straight," he said. "You're doing this for families who asked you for help 2 weeks after you arrived in a town that sent you a letter about your presentation. You came here to leave, and instead you're—" He gestured the way people gesture when words aren't quite covering it, telegraphing judges. "Someone needed to," she said. "I know that. I'm not—" He exhaled. "I want you to eat something that isn't Mrs. Patterson's bread and go to sleep before midnight, that's all. The records office will still be there in the morning." She looked at him. He looked back. The evening was doing its summer thing. The heat not gone, but softened the sky. Gone to the deep blue that was as close to beautiful as Nevada usually got. "You're worried about me," she said. "I am consistently and increasingly worried about you," he said with a directness that matched her own back at her. "You should know that I'm going to keep being worried about you regardless of what you do about it, so you might as well just eat something." Something happened in the center of Willa's chest that she didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't the warmth of being seen, she'd cataloged that twice already. This was something else. Something that had weight to it. Permanence almost. She found that it didn't frighten her. "There's a place on 3rd Street that May says makes a decent meal," she said. "I know it," he said. "I've been eating there for 2 seasons. "Then you can tell me if the recommendation holds up." So, it held up. They sat across from each other at a small table and ate and talked about things that were not land disputes or committee letters or the Greer brothers. And Willa discovered that Daniel Walker had opinions, genuine, considered sometimes surprising ones, about books and cattle and the nature of memory, and the particular quality of quiet that exists in the desert before dawn that he said was the reason he'd never been able to live in a city for more than a week. "I tried Denver once," he said. 18 months ago. A man I knew was starting a freight operation and wanted a partner. What happened? 3 days in, I realized the sound of that many people all at once was going to unmake me. He said it without apology. I lasted the week, told him I wasn't the right fit for city work. Did he understand? He thought I was foolish, Daniel said. He might be right. The freight operation's doing well. A pause. But he's in Denver. Willa looked at him across the table. You don't regret it. Not for a single day. How do you know, without regret I mean? How do you know when a choice is right? He thought about that seriously, which she appreciated. He had the quality of taking questions seriously that a lot of people of both genders appeared to find unnecessary. You know the way, you know anything's right, he said. It settles. The right things settle. The wrong ones keep moving around. Keep needing you to look at them from different angles, to keep convincing yourself. Willa was quiet for a moment. She was thinking without entirely meaning to about a train ticket in a bent hand on a summer morning. About how certain she'd been. About how that certainty had felt clean and final and correct, and how none of those things were what she felt right now. Right now she felt unsettled, but not in the wrong things way. In a way she didn't have a word for yet. "Your month is almost up," Daniel said. He said it carefully, watching her. "8 days," she said. "I know." He was quiet. "I meant what I said at the station. At the end of 8 days, if you want to go, I meant it that I won't stop you." "But—" She heard the shape of it in his silence. "But I hope you won't." He held her eyes. "I hope you won't, Willa. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She had spent 22 years being clear-eyed about things. She prided herself on it. She had always believed that sentimentality was what happened when you let feeling outrun thinking, and she had a well-established policy against outrunning. She looked at Daniel Walker across a table on 3rd Street and thought, "I am not outrunning anything. This is thinking. This is very clear-eyed thinking that happens to feel like something. 8 days is still 8 days," she said. "Ask me then." He nodded. He didn't push. That she thought was the thing about him he never pushed. He stood in front of a situation with his whole attention, and he waited for it to meet him. She was beginning to understand that this was rarer than it should be. Monday morning delivered 2 things simultaneously: the county records and a problem. The records were useful. She found the Vale property file inside our original land grant tax assessment history, and critically, the arrears notice which had been issued in February. The statutory notification requirement specified 60 days minimum before an acquisition claim could be filed. 60 days from February put the earliest possible filing date at mid-April. It was late June, which meant an acquisition claim filed now was inside the statutory window. Legal. Entirely frustratingly legal. But the notification process, she checked it twice, and then a 3rd time, because she wanted to be certain required written notice to any established occupants or users of the land before the claim was finalized. Rosa Reyes had received no written notice. May's grandmother had received no written notice. The other 2 families had received nothing. That was not legal. That was an exploitable gap. She was still sitting with this realization, turning it carefully and looking at its edges, when May appeared in the doorway of the records office with an expression that meant news, and not the comfortable kind. "The Greer brothers had a meeting this morning," May said without preamble. "Harold and James at the assayer's office. Clarence Dupree's assistant saw them going in." Willa looked up. "Harold Greer, the school committee chairman." "The same." May came to the table, sat down, lowered her voice. "And there's something else. Mrs. Patterson, I stopped at the boarding house on my way. There was a man there this morning before you left. He asked Mrs. Patterson questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "Where you were from, whether you had family in the area, whether you planned to stay." May's jaw was set. "Mrs. Patterson told him you were a private individual, and she didn't answer questions about her boarders. Then she showed him the door." "Did she describe him?" "Brown coat, 40s. Spoke like he was used to being answered." Willa set down her pen. She was doing the calculation she'd been avoiding, adding up the Greer brothers in the same room, and a man asking questions about her, and an acquisition timeline that was suddenly moving faster than a Thursday telegraph was going to address. "I need to talk to Daniel," she said. "We'll sit." Daniel was at the Callaway spread, which was 40 minutes by road. She sent word through May, who sent word through her grandmother's neighbor's son, which was apparently a faster system than anything official Hawthorne had on offer, and he appeared at the records office inside an hour with Callaway himself, which she hadn't expected. Thomas Callaway was a big, quiet, deliberate man, who shook Willa's hand with the directness of someone who has evaluated her and made his decision and doesn't see the need to be indirect about it. "Daniel tells me you found the notification gap," he said. "Yes." She showed him the statute, and the notice date, and the gap between them. He read it in silence, moving his jaw slightly, and then looked up. "That's enough for Harlan." If we can get it to him before James Greer files the claim. Greer can't file before the clerk processes the original notice, Calloway said. I know Alderman Potts, he's involved, and Potts is not a fast mover. He's careful. He'll want everything documented before he attaches his name. He paused. We probably have until Wednesday, possibly Thursday morning. Harlan arrives Thursday afternoon, Daniel said. Then it's close, Willa said. It's close, Calloway agreed. He looked at her steadily. You're willing to present this to Harlan yourself? I wrote most of it, she said. Yes. He'll push back. Harlan's a fair man, but he doesn't enjoy having his circuit complicated. Then I'll be clear and brief and make it as uncomplicated as possible. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know Harold Greer is going to make your life in this town difficult if you do this. Harold Greer already wrote me a letter about my presentation, Willa said. I'm not sure his opinion of me has additional room to decline. Something that was almost a smile moved across Calloway's face. He looked at Daniel. Daniel said nothing, but the expression on his face said something Willa decided not to look at directly, because if she looked at it directly, she was going to have to process it, and she had a territorial statute to finish organizing. All right, Calloway said. What do you need from me between now and Thursday? Tuesday was the day Harold Greer came to find her himself. She had half expected it. James Greer's visit to Mrs. Patterson's had been a warning shot. Harold Greer, she suspected, was the kind of man who followed warning shots with the real thing. She was at the library. Her own instinct was always the library when she needed to think when he walked in at 11 in the morning, with the particular stride of someone who has decided they are angry and wants to make sure the destination knows it before they arrive. Miss Dalton. He stopped 2 tables away. He had brought his committee bearing with him, the way he held his shoulders, the slight tilt of his chin that communicated authority by posture. Mr. Greer. She did not stand. She moved nothing except her eyes. I'd say this is a surprise, but it isn't. I'll be direct with you. Please. You are involving yourself in matters that are well outside your concern and well above your... He paused, and she watched him select his word with the care of a man who knows which one's cut. Standing in this community. My standing in this community was established by your committee, she said. So I'm afraid I can't take your assessment of it very seriously. His jaw tightened. You failed the review. You wrote me a letter about my presentation, she said. I remember it well, I kept it. I thought it might be useful someday. She held his gaze. Turns out I was right. What exactly do you mean by that? I mean that a committee chairman's documented pattern of excluding qualified candidates on the basis of presentation is relevant context when the same chairman's brother is found to be conducting land acquisition activity that fails statutory notification requirements. She paused. I mean that those 2 things placed in front of a territorial judge paint a picture. Harold Greer went still in the way of someone who has just realized they miscalculated the size of what they walked into. You're making accusations. I'm describing documents, Willa said. I've read the statutes. I've read the notice dates. I've read the testimonies of 4 families who received no written notification as required by territorial law. I haven't made a single accusation. I've simply read. She tilted her head. I was always very good at reading, Mr. Greer. You might have discovered that if your committee had been interested in finding out. He looked at her for a long moment. The library was silent around them. Mrs. Alcott had apparently decided that shelving could wait. You don't know what you're starting, he said. It was quieter than his earlier statements, lower, which somehow made it worse. I know exactly what I'm starting, Willa said. And I know exactly what I'm finishing. Good morning, Mr. Greer. He left. Mrs. Alcott emerged from behind the shelves. She looked at Willa. She looked at the door. She said without inflection, I have coffee in the back room. I would very much appreciate that, Willa said. Her hands were shaking again. She was starting to regard this as a reliable indicator that she'd done the right thing. Daniel heard about the library confrontation from Mrs. Alcott, who apparently told May Chin, who told Rosa Reyes, who told Daniel, when he stopped at the Reyes place on his way back from the east fence line. He came to Mrs. Patterson's that evening, and for the first time since Willa had known him, he didn't knock with the quiet patience of a man comfortable with waiting. He knocked with urgency. She opened the door. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not anger, not fear exactly, but the particular face of a man who has been keeping something contained and is reassessing whether to keep containing it. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm fine." Harold Greer came to the library. He did. "And you?" He stopped, looked at her. "What did you say to him?" She told him. He listened. His expression cycled through several things in sequence: concern, which shifted to something fiercer, which shifted to something that looked very much like pride and was working hard not to show it fully. "You told him the letter was useful," he said. "It was." Willa. He said her name with the particular weight it had been accumulating over the past weeks, not as a dress, but as something more. "I need to tell you something." She waited. "I am—" He stopped. Started again in the way of someone who has been choosing words their whole life, but has come to a sentence that doesn't have a safe version. "I am not standing here because of the Vale property, or the Greer brothers, or the families, or any of it. I'm standing here because I need you to know that when this is over, however it ends, I don't want you to leave." The evening was still. Somewhere down the street, a door opened and closed. "Daniel, I know the month," he said. "I know I said I wouldn't stop you. I'm not stopping you. I'm telling you, because I'd rather you knew and made your choice with the whole truth in front of you than made it without." He held her eyes. "I'm in love with you, Willa. I've been watching it happen for 4 weeks, and I've been careful about it because you asked for time and you deserve it. But you deserve the truth more." Willa stood in the doorway of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and felt the full weight of that land on her, the statement and what it meant and what she felt in response to it, which was not the frightening thing she'd always assumed this feeling would be. It wasn't loss of self. It wasn't compromise. It was addition. Something added to what she already was not in place of it. "You have terrible timing," she said. "I know. We're in the middle of a land dispute." "I know that too. We have a territorial judge arriving in 2 days." "Also aware." She looked at him. He looked back. And for all that she was a woman who prided herself on thinking clearly and moving carefully and not letting feeling outrun reason, for all of that, she found that what she felt in this moment was not complicated. It was, in fact, the least complicated thing she'd felt since she arrived in Hawthorne. "Ask me again," she said. "After Thursday." He exhaled the slow, complete exhale of a man who has said the true thing and been met with something he can work with. "After Thursday." "And Daniel." She held his gaze. "I'm not running from an answer. I want you to know that." Something shifted in his face, open and real, and more than she'd expected to do to a person with 7 words. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you're not." Wednesday arrived with the news that James Greer had filed a preliminary acquisition notice with the county clerk. Not the final claim, the preliminary notice, which was a procedural step, not a binding one. But it meant the timeline had compressed further, and it meant that whatever was going to happen in front of Judge Harlan on Thursday was going to happen with the full awareness of everyone involved. Willa spent Wednesday finalizing the documentation. She wrote the summary argument herself, 3 pages clear and sequential. No flourish. Nothing that could be challenged as emotional or imprecise. She cited statute numbers. She cited notice dates. She cited the gap. She attached the family testimonies and Callaway's boundary map and the copies of the relevant records she'd pulled from the county files. Then she read it back to Daniel, who sat at Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table and listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "That's the best thing I've ever heard in that kitchen," Mrs. Patterson said from the stove. Daniel said, "It's correct. Every word of it is correct, and it's written so plainly that anyone trying to argue with it is going to look like they're arguing with arithmetic." "That was the goal," Willa said. "You're going to be remarkable in front of him," Daniel said. "I'm going to be precise," she corrected. Remarkable can wait. The twist arrived Thursday morning, 4 hours before Judge Harlan's stage was due. Mrs. Patterson woke Willa at 6, with a face that meant something had happened, and something had. Rosa Reyes had arrived at the boarding house before sunrise on foot, with the news that James Greer had filed the full acquisition claim overnight. Not the preliminary, the final claim. A full day ahead of any timeline Calloway had calculated. He moved Alderman Potts, Daniel said when Willa told him he'd arrived minutes after Rosa, which meant the news was already moving through town faster than sunrise. Potts signed off last night. Someone got to him. The claim is filed, Willa said. Can Harlan still override it? If the notification gap holds, does it still hold? With a filed claim? Daniel looked at her. His jaw was tight. I don't know. I don't know enough law to answer that. Willa looked at her 3 pages of documentation. She looked at the clock on Mrs. Patterson's wall. She looked at Rosa Reyes, who was standing with the precise stillness of a woman who has been afraid before and has learned to be still inside it. Then I need to be there when Harlan's stage arrives, Willa said. Not at the courthouse at the stage stop, before he sets foot in this town through official channels. She stood. If I can get those documents in front of him before James Greer's clerk does, before anyone has framed this for him. He's not going to like that, Daniel said. No, she agreed. He's going to like it considerably less than he'd like a complicated Thursday afternoon with inadequate preparation. She picked up the documents, which is why I'm going to be there with the arithmetic already done. She was out the door before either of them could say another word. Daniel was beside her before she reached the gate. She didn't tell him he didn't need to come. She already knew he was coming. And she already knew in the way that right things settle, the way he'd described it over dinner on 3rd Street, that she was glad he was. The stage stop on the north end of Hawthorne was not a place designed for confrontation. It was a practical structure, a covered platform, a water trough, a bench worn smooth by 10 years of waiting travelers, and it had the particular indifference of places that have seen too many departures to be impressed by arrivals. Willa didn't care what it was designed for. She stood on the platform, with her 3 pages of documentation pressed against her side, and watched the road north with the focused attention of a woman who has decided that the next hour is going to go a specific way and is prepared to enforce that decision personally. Daniel stood beside her. He hadn't spoken since they left Mrs. Patterson's gate, and she hadn't asked him to. His presence was its own complete sentence. He may not stop to talk, Daniel said finally. Circuit judges travel on schedule. He'll stop to water the horses, Willa said. That gives me 10 minutes at minimum. 10 minutes to convince a territorial judge to hold a filed land claim pending review. 10 minutes to hand him 3 pages of arithmetic, she corrected. He can convince himself. She heard the stage before she saw it. The particular sound of 4 horses working the creak and rattle of a coach that has covered considerable Nevada road. Then it came around the bend, and it was larger than she'd imagined, and moving faster, and the driver pulled it up at the trough with the efficiency of someone who has done this particular stop 100 times. A man stepped down from the coach before the dust had finished settling. He was in his 60s, solid through the shoulders, with the face of someone who had been deciding things for so long that his expression had permanently settled into the posture of decision. He wore a dark coat and no hat, which she noted. He looked at the water trough, then at the platform, then at Willa, with the sequential attention of a man who processes his environment in order of relevance. He apparently decided she was relevant. "You're waiting for someone," he said. It was not entirely a question. "For you, Your Honor," she said. "If you're Judge Harlan." "I am." He looked at her with the evaluating steadiness of a man who has had people approach him at stage stops before and has learned to read the difference between wasted time and something else. "And you are?" "Wilhelmina Dalton. I've been in Hawthorne for approximately 1 month." She held out the documents. "I have 3 pages I'd like you to read before you're formally briefed on the Vale property acquisition claim. The notification gap is on page 2. He looked at the documents. He looked at her. He looked at Daniel, who touched his hat brim with the precise minimal courtesy of a man who is present but understands this is not his moment. Harlan took the documents. He read them standing up, which she hadn't expected. She'd thought he might dismiss them or defer or tell her to bring them to the courthouse through proper channels. Instead, he stood at the stage stop in the Nevada summer heat and read 3 pages of statute citations and documented notification failures, with the focused attention of a man for whom arithmetic was a native language. He turned to page 2. He was quiet for a long moment. "The notice was issued in February," he said. "Yes, Your Honor." "The acquisition claim was filed last night." "Yes." "And these 4 families," he tapped the testimonies, "received no written notification as required under Territorial Statute 44 Section 9. "No written notification of any kind," she confirmed. "I spoke with each family directly. I have their signed statements." "You wrote this summary yourself?" "Yes." He looked up. "What is your occupation, Miss Dalton?" "Schoolteacher," she said. "Or I was attempting to be one. The local committee found my presentation unsuitable." Something moved behind Harlan's eyes, brief and dry and entirely internal. "I see." He looked back at the documents. "The committee chairman's name is Harold Greer." "Yes." "And the acquisition claim was filed by James Greer." "His brother." Another silence. "The horses were drinking. The driver was checking a wheel with the incuriosity of a man who is professionally deaf to other people's business." "Miss Dalton," Judge Harlan said, "in 30 years on the circuit, I have been handed documents at a stage stop exactly twice. The first time it was a death threat. The second time it was a divorce petition written on the back of a flour sack." He held up her 3 pages. "This is considerably more organized than either." "I had 9 days to prepare," she said. "I used them." He almost smiled. She was fairly certain of it. "I'll review this fully before any proceeding. I make no promises about outcome that depends on the evidence and the law." "That's all I'm asking," she said. "The evidence and the law. That's all any of them are asking." He nodded once, folded the documents with the care of a man who has decided something is worth keeping intact, and stepped back toward the coach. Then he paused. "The notification gap you identified," he said without turning. "If it holds under examination, the acquisition claim cannot be finalized regardless of who filed it or when." He climbed back into the coach. Willa stood on the platform and breathed. Daniel said very quietly, "Willa, don't," she said just as quietly. "Let me just—" She breathed again. "Give me 1 minute." He gave her the minute. He gave it to her completely standing beside her without touching or speaking, while the stage moved back onto the road, and the dust of it settled, and the morning continued, doing what mornings do, regardless of what human beings are surviving inside them. "All right," she said after the minute. "We need to be at the courthouse by 2 o'clock. "Yes," he said. "And we need Rosa and May's grandmother and the other 2 families there as well." "I'll send word. And Calloway, Willa." He waited until she looked at him. "I'll handle the arrangements. You have done—" He stopped, and she could see him choosing the word with the seriousness it deserved. "You have done something today that I don't know how to adequately name." She looked at him. He looked back with those gray eyes that were paying the specific kind of attention that had stopped being just attention some time ago. "Name it later," she said. "Courthouse at 2. The courthouse at 2 o'clock was a different kind of theater than the stage stop, with its own conventions and its own particular pressure. James Greer arrived with Alderman Potts and a man who identified himself as their legal representative, a thin man from Reno whose name was Whitfield and who carried his briefcase with the air of someone who expected to be the most prepared person in any room he entered. He was not on this occasion the most prepared person in the room. Willa sat at the respondent's table. She had no formal standing technically, but Harlan had noted her presence without objecting, which she took as permission, with the families arranged in the gallery behind her. Rosa Reyes straight-backed and still. May Chin, her hand resting on her grandmother's arm. The other two families, men and women who had been working the same land for years, and had arrived in their good clothes because this was the kind of day that deserved good clothes. Calloway sat behind Daniel, who sat beside Willa. Harold Greer was in the back row. She felt his presence without looking. She did not look. Harlan came in, established the nature of the proceeding in 3 sentences, and then said, "I've reviewed documentation presented to me this morning regarding the notification requirements for the Vale property acquisition. Before we proceed to the claim itself, I want to address the statutory question." Whitfield stood. "Your Honor, the claim was filed in accordance with—" "I know what it was filed in accordance with," Harlan said. "I also know what it was not filed in accordance with. Sit down, Mr. Whitfield." Whitfield sat down. The notification gap, Harlan explained, in the patient and precise language of someone who is making the record absolutely clear, required written notice to documented users of the land in question before a final acquisition claim could proceed. The failure to provide that notice did not invalidate the preliminary steps of the process. It did, however, invalidate the final claim as filed. James Greer said, "Your Honor." "Mr. Greer?" Harlan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You will have opportunity to speak." Greer sat back. "The claim as filed is procedurally insufficient," Harlan continued. "It cannot be finalized without the required notification being issued and the statutory response period observed. That period is 30 days from written notice." He looked at the room. "Which means the earliest possible finalized claim date is 30 days from today. At which point the families affected will have had the opportunity to formally contest the acquisition on the basis of their established usage agreements, which they will have 30 days to document fully." Whitfield was on his feet again. "Your Honor, the tax arrears on the property are legitimate." "No one is disputing the arrears," Harlan said. "The arrears are the arrears. The notification requirement is the notification requirement. These are not competing facts." He looked at Whitfield with the patience of a man who has explained the difference between law and convenience many times before. "The law applies to everyone in this territory, Mr. Whitfield, including your clients." Willa felt the shift in the room, the way you feel a change in air pressure, not dramatic, but real and total. Beside her, Daniel let out a breath he'd been holding so quietly she hadn't known it was held. Behind her, she heard Rosa Reyes make a sound. Barely a sound. The kind a person makes when a thing they were afraid to hope for becomes suddenly possible. The proceeding lasted 40 minutes. Harlan was thorough, and he was fair, and he was not interested in theater. By the time he concluded, the acquisition claim had been suspended pending proper notification and a formal contestation period, and Whitfield was packing his briefcase with the particular speed of a man who would prefer to be somewhere else. James Greer walked past the respondent's table on his way out. He did not look at Willa. She noted this as the loudest thing he'd done all afternoon. Harold Greer, she discovered when she turned, was already gone. Calloway shook her hand with both of his, which she suspected was not something he did often. "Good work, Miss Dalton," he said. "Clean work." Rosa was crying, which she was doing in the efficient way of a woman who has allocated a specific amount of time to it, and intends to be done by the time she reaches the door. She held Willa's hands and said something in Spanish that Willa didn't fully follow, and then she said in English, "My children will know your name." "Teach them to read it themselves," Willa said. Rosa laughed through the crying and let go of her hands and turned to gather her family. Mrs. Chin's grandmother said something to May. May turned to Willa. "She says the tea is on her, whenever you want it." "Tell her Monday," Willa said. May told her. The old woman nodded once with the authority of someone who has now added this to her list of commitments and considers the matter settled. The month ended on a Friday. Willa knew it as she woke up. She'd been counting not consciously, but with the part of her that tracks things even when the rest of her is occupied. 30 days from the train platform measured in everything that had happened inside them, which was considerably more than she would have predicted when she'd stood there with a bent ticket in her hand. She was sitting on Mrs. Patterson's front porch when Daniel arrived. He came on foot, no horse, no work clothes, which she noticed. He was wearing the kind of shirt a person wears when the occasion is not ranch work, and his hat was in his hands, same as the very first morning, same as it had been every time something important needed to be said between them. He sat in the other chair without being asked. "It's Friday," he said. "It is." "The month is up." "It is," she said again. He turned the hat in his hands. She watched his hands. They were steady, she'd always noticed that about him. Steady hands. A man who did what he said he would do and held things carefully and didn't drop them. "You said to ask you after Thursday," he said. "I did." "It's after Thursday." "Considerably after," she agreed. "By about 18 hours. He looked at her. She looked back. The morning was doing its summer thing, hot and golden and indifferent to the feelings of the people sitting in it, and somewhere down the street a child was laughing with the kind of whole-body laughter that children produce when something is genuinely uncontainably funny. "Do you have an answer?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Not because she didn't know the answer, she'd known it for several days, and she suspected he knew that she knew it, because he was a man who paid the particular kind of attention that sees things before they are fully declared. But because the answer deserved a real moment, not a casual one. Because some things should be said with their full weight. "I came to this town to leave it," she said. "I was certain of that. I've spent most of my life being certain of things, and being right about them, so I had no particular reason to question myself." He waited. He was excellent at waiting. "You stopped me on a train platform," she said, "and asked me to give a town a chance, and I thought you were either very brave or very foolish, and I hadn't determined which." She held his gaze. "I've determined it now." "And you're both," she said. "But the proportions are favorable." She let that settle for one breath, and then she said, "I'm not leaving Daniel. And it's not because of the families or the school or Mrs. Patterson's good cooking, though all of those things matter. It's because you were right at the restaurant. The right things settle. And this has settled." He looked at her with an expression that she had no one clean word for. It was too many things at once, most of them good, all of them real. "I'd like to court you properly," he said. "With your permission, and with every intention of asking you something more significant in due time when you're ready for it." "That is a very measured sentence for a man who told me he was in love with me on a Wednesday during a land dispute," she said. "I'm trying to demonstrate range," he said. She laughed. The real kind. The kind that surprised her, same as the first time in the library. He looked at that laugh with the same expression he'd had then, and she understood that he was going to keep looking at it that way, and that this was not a small thing. "Yes," she said. "You have my permission." He reached out, slow, careful, deliberate, same as everything he did, and took her hand. Not the urgency of a held arm on a train platform. Something else. Something that intended to last. She let him hold it. The formal contestation of the Vale property acquisition was filed the following Monday by the four families collectively, with documentation prepared by Willa and witnessed by Thomas Calloway. It was a clean filing, precise, statute-cited, unambiguous, and it landed on the county clerk's desk with the particular authority of paperwork that knows exactly what it is. Alderman Potts withdrew his support from the acquisition the same week. No public statement. He simply withdrew it the way men like Potts withdraw from things quietly, and with the hope that the withdrawal would be noticed less than the original involvement. James Greer filed a response through Whitfield. The response was technically sound and legally insufficient, which was a combination Willa found almost satisfying in its transparency. Harold Greer said nothing publicly. He attended his committee meetings and kept his chairman's posture, and did not, to anyone's knowledge, write any further letters about anyone's presentation. May Chin told Willa 2 weeks after the courthouse proceeding that she'd heard Harold Greer had received a letter of inquiry from the Territorial Education Board asking about the committee's review process for teaching candidates. Willa did not ask who had sent that inquiry. She had her suspicions, and they were warm ones. The twist that Willa had not anticipated, the one that arrived 6 weeks after the courthouse, and rearranged everything she'd built her next chapter around, came in the form of a letter. Not from her aunt, not from the territorial court, from the Hawthorne School Board, not Harold Greer's committee. The school board itself, the parent body 3 levels above the local committee, which apparently had authority, Willa had not known to research because she hadn't known to look. She read it at Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, which was still the cruelest day of the week for significant correspondence. Then she read it again. The board had received multiple letters from Rosa Reyes, from May Chin, from Thomas Calloway, and from a woman named Eleanor Walker of Pueblo, Colorado, whose son had written her several weeks ago, and whom she had apparently taken as her personal cue to act. The letters described in various voices, and with various levels of detail, a woman who had been operating an informal school in a boarding house kitchen, who had increased literacy among 7 children in 4 weeks, who had stood in front of a territorial judge with 3 pages of documented statute law and won. The board was writing to inform Miss Wilhelmina Dalton that the local committee's review decision had been overturned. The position of schoolteacher for Hawthorne Township was if she wanted it hers. Willa sat at Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table and held the letter and felt moving through her in a slow, complete wave. Something she had not felt since she was a child and hadn't yet learned to protect herself from the full force of things' simple, unguarded joy. Mrs. Patterson looked at her face and set down her dish towel. "Good news," she said. It was not a question. "Very good news," Willa managed. "Then I'll make the good coffee," Mrs. Patterson said, and turned to the stove and said nothing else, because she was a woman who understood that some moments don't need commentary. Willa looked at the letter one more time. Then she looked toward the window, toward the street, toward the general direction of the Calloway spread northwest quarter, where a man with gray eyes was doing his morning work without knowing that his mother had just from 400 miles away changed the course of a life that was already quietly, irrevocably becoming bound up with his. She was going to have a great deal to tell him tonight. She told him that evening on the same front porch, in the same chairs with the same summer heat, doing its slow retreat into something almost bearable. She handed him the letter without saying anything first. He read it the way he read everything completely, without rushing, with the focused stillness of a man who gives things their full due. She watched his face while he read it. She had become over the past weeks something of a student of his face, its economy, the way it communicated without performing. He finished the letter. He read one section again. Then he looked up. "My mother wrote to the board," he said. "She did, along with Rosa and May and Calloway. And apparently your mother's letter was the longest," Willa said. According to the board secretary, who included a note, she described it as, and I'm quoting directly, unusually thorough for a private correspondence. Something moved through Daniel's expression, deep and layered, and not entirely suppressible. He looked back down at the letter for a moment. When he looked up again, his eyes were doing something she'd never seen them do before. They were bright. "She's never met you," he said. "No. She wrote a letter to a territorial school board on behalf of a woman she's never met, based on your letters," Willa said quietly. "Whatever you told her." He was very still. "You must have told her quite a lot," she said. "I told her the truth," he said. Which in this case happened to be quite a lot. He held the letter out to her. She took it. Their fingers touched in the transfer brief, and neither of them moved away from it faster than necessary. "Willa, this is what you came here for." "I came here to leave," she said. "We've established that. Before Hawthorne, this," he gestured at the letter in her hand, "is what you were going to that school board meeting for, what you'd been working toward." "Yes," she said. "It is." "How does it feel?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Like something that was always going to be true," she said, finally catching up to the moment. She looked at the letter one more time, then folded it carefully. "And like, I want to tell your mother, thank you in person." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when 2 people are standing on either side of a threshold. they have both been walking toward and have now simultaneously arrived at. That could be arranged, Daniel said carefully. Could it? Pueblo is not unreachable. I'm aware of where Pueblo is. I'm saying... He stopped, looked at her with the full weight of the gray eyes. I'm saying that if you wanted to meet her, I'd like to take you. When you're ready, in whatever capacity feels right, at whatever point we've reached by then. That is, she said, another very measured sentence. I'm still demonstrating range, Daniel. She turned in her chair to face him fully. Ask me what you want to ask me. We have been talking around the edges of it for 3 weeks, and I am a woman who prefers the center of things. He held her gaze. Then he said without any of the careful circling, Will you marry me, Willa? Not today. Not next week if you're not ready. But will you? Is that where we're going? The question was so plainly exactly what she'd known it would be. No flourish, no performance. Just the true thing said, in the true way that she felt it land, with the completeness of something that fits precisely where it was always meant to go. Yes, she said. That's where we're going. He let out a breath. She hadn't known he was holding it. He was always so steady. But there it was. The exhale of a man who had been carrying a hope carefully for a long time, and has just been told he can set it down, not because it didn't matter, but because it had become something larger and more permanent than hope. Yes, she said again, because once felt insufficient for what she meant by it. She started at the schoolhouse the second Monday of August. She walked in, wrote her name on the board. Miss Dalton turned around and looked at 14 children ranging in age from 6 to 12, who looked back at her with the combined expression of a group that has not yet decided what to make of her. Mateo Reyes was in the second row. He was trying not to smile and failing. And, "Good morning," she said. "We are going to learn a great many things this year, and I'm going to expect a great deal from every one of you, and you are going to surprise yourselves regularly." She picked up the chalk, the same chalk, or very like it, that Daniel had brought in a box from the hardware store on a Saturday morning that felt like both 2 weeks and 2 years ago. We'll start with reading. Who in this room believes they are a reader? 3 hands went up immediately. 2 went up slowly with the caution of children who have been wrong before and are protecting against the cost of being wrong again. Mateo's went up last and all the way, and with the particular confidence of a boy who knows a word like fortitude and has used it in a sentence. "Good," Willa said. "We have a foundation to work from." She taught for 5 hours. By the end of the first day, she knew every child's name and 3 things about each of them: what they were confident in, what they were afraid of, and what they lit up about when the topic touched something alive in them. It was a skill her mother had called reading people, which was, Willa had always thought, just reading with your whole attention instead of only your eyes. Rosa Reyes was waiting outside when the school day ended. She was not alone. May Chin was there, and Mrs. Patterson had walked over from the boarding house, and Thomas Calloway had apparently found a reason to be in town on a Monday afternoon, which he was not a man who did without purpose. "Well," Rosa said. 14 students, Willa said. 3 natural readers, 4 who will be by October. Mateo is going to give me a run for my money within the year." Rosa's face did the thing it had done in the boarding house kitchen, the smile that rearranged everything. "And," May said with the tone of someone who wants a different answer than the professional one, "and it's the best day I've had since I was 8 years old and read my first real book in one sitting and didn't sleep because I couldn't stop thinking about it." Willa looked at the group of them, these people who had in 30 days, and without any agreement between them, become the architecture of a life she hadn't planned. "Thank you, all of you, for the letters. We told the truth," Calloway said. He said it the way he said everything, short and final, and with no interest in embellishment. "You told it loudly," she said. "That made the difference." Mrs. Patterson said nothing. She produced a handkerchief from her sleeve and applied it briefly to the corner of one eye, then returned it with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has acknowledged a feeling and is now moving on from it. "Dinner at 6, she said. "The good coffee." "The good coffee," Willa confirmed. Daniel proposed formally 3 months later on the front porch in the fall, when the heat had finally conceded entirely, and the evening air had that quality that only Nevada autumn manages, cool and clear, and carrying the particular silence of a season that has finished its work. He had a ring. It had been his mother's, which she didn't know, until he told her, and the telling of it made something in her chest do a thing she had no clinical word for. She sent it with the last letter, he said. Said she'd been keeping it for the right woman, and she'd been waiting longer than was comfortable, and would I please take care of it. Willa held the ring in her palm, and looked at it, and looked at him, and said, "Your mother is remarkable. She's going to say the same about you. When do I get to tell her she's right about both of us?" "Christmas," he said. "If you'll come to Pueblo for Christmas." "I'll come to Pueblo for Christmas," she said, and slid the ring onto her finger, and held out her hand to look at it, the way a person looks at something that is both new and inevitable. They were married in the spring in the Hawthorne church on a Saturday morning, when the desert was doing its brief, stubborn annual attempt at something resembling green. Eleanor Walker came from Pueblo. She was smaller than Willa had imagined. She'd built her taller, in the way she built most people she admired, before meeting them with sharp eyes and her son's mouth and the handshake of a woman who has made every one of her decisions fully and has no regrets about the method. She held Willa's hands for a moment before the ceremony and said, "He wrote me about a woman who told Harold Greer his letter was going to be useful someday." Her eyes were bright. "I knew then." "Knew what?" Willa asked. "That you were the kind of woman who turns obstacles into evidence," Eleanor said. "My son needed that. I needed to know he'd found it." Willa looked at this woman who had taught school in Colorado until the county pulled the funding and had gone home and cried for a week and then gotten up, who had raised 4 children mostly alone, who had written a letter to a territorial school board for a woman she'd never met because her son's letters told her enough of the truth. "He's the same kind," Willa said. "In case you wondered." Eleanor Walker's eyes went bright in the exact same way her son's had gone bright on the front porch with the letter in his hands. "I know," she said. "I raised him to be." The Vale property contestation was resolved by Judge Harlan the following spring, 14 months after Willa had handed him 3 pages at a stage stop. The notification gap held. The acquisition claim was denied. The 4 families retained their grazing rights, formalized this time in written arrangements that Willa drafted and Callaway witnessed, and which were filed with the county clerk with considerably more official standing than Hector Vale's handshakes. James Greer's response through Whitfield was rejected on procedural grounds. He did not file a second response. Harold Greer resigned from the school committee 6 months after Willa began teaching. The official reason, as communicated by the board secretary, was personal time constraints. No one in Hawthorne discussed it publicly. Everyone in Hawthorne understood it completely. The Territorial Education Board sent Willa a letter of commendation the following year, noting her literacy outcomes and requesting that she consider presenting her methods at a regional teachers' conference in Reno. She went. She presented. 12 teachers from 4 counties attended. She came home to Daniel, who was waiting on the porch. Their porch, now the small house on the east side of town that they had moved into 6 weeks after the wedding, with coffee and the particular expression of a man who is exactly where he chose to be. "How was it?" he asked. 12 teachers, she said, sitting beside him. 2 of them are going to change things in their counties. I could see it while I was talking the moment something landed. And the other 10? The other 10 will carry pieces of it back with them, and the pieces will matter to someone, even if the teachers don't know it. She took the coffee from him. That's how it works. You put the word out there, and you don't always see where it lands. He was quiet for a moment. "Mateo Reyes asked me this week," Daniel said, "whether I thought he could get into the territorial normal school to study teaching." Willa went still. "He did. He said he wanted to ask you, but he thought maybe I was a safer first attempt." The corner of Daniel's mouth moved. "I told him you'd eat the question alive and ask for more." "What did he say to that?" "He said he figured as much and he was going to ask you anyway." A pause. "He said you taught him the word fortitude, and he'd been using it." Something moved through Willa so completely and so quietly that she didn't try to name it. She just let it move through her and sat with her coffee and the fall air and the man beside her who had stopped her on a train platform 2 years ago with his hat in his hands, and a question she hadn't known yet was the right one. "Tell him to come see me Monday," she said. "We'll talk about the application requirements. The normal school has a scholarship process. I've read the statutes." "Of course you have," Daniel said. "I read everything," she said. "You knew that when you married me." "I did," he said. "I considered it a feature." She looked at him. He looked back. The evening was settling around them in the way of evenings that have no particular agenda, the good kind, the kind that simply exists and asks nothing of the people sitting in it. "Your mother wrote me a letter," Willa said. "Did she tell you?" "She tells me everything except what she thinks I already know," she said. Willa paused, turned the sentence over to make sure she had it right. She said she spent 40 years teaching children in a room that was too cold in winter and too hot in summer, and she never once regretted a single day of it. She said the regrets she had were the days she didn't fight hard enough for the things worth fighting for. She held Daniel's gaze. She said she was glad her son had found a woman who understood the difference between those two things. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "She's right," he said, "about the difference." "She usually is," Willa said. "I've come to understand that about her." He reached over and took her hand the same way he'd taken it on the porch the evening the month ended, deliberate and careful, and with every intention of keeping it. She let him keep it. Years later, when people in Hawthorne talked about Wilhelmina Walker, and they did talk about her in the way that towns talk about people who have become part of their permanent story, they talked about her in the present tense, even when referring to the past. She was the teacher who had stood at a stage stop with 3 pages of statute law and changed the land situation for 4 families. She was the woman who had turned Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table into a school before the school was ready to have her. She was the one who had looked at Harold Greer across a library table and told him his letter was going to be useful someday. They talked about Daniel, too, the cowboy who had stopped a woman from boarding a train and asked her to give the town a chance, which was depending on who was telling the story, either the bravest or the most audacious thing anyone had done on that platform in living memory. The children Willa taught grew up and had children of their own, and some of those children ended up in her classroom too, which she found to be one of the most complete satisfactions she had ever experienced. Mateo Reyes earned his place at the normal school and came back to Hawthorne 3 years later as a teacher himself, which meant there were 2 of them in the county who had read the territorial statutes cover to cover and would not hesitate to say so. She kept Harold Greer's letter. She had said she would, and she was a woman who kept her word. It lived in the bottom drawer of her desk at the schoolhouse, folded to the 3rd paragraph, suitable temperament and presentation facing up. She showed it to students occasionally, the older ones, the ones old enough to understand what it meant, not as a grievance, but as a lesson. "This is what the world sometimes says about you," she told them. "This is the evidence you collect anyway. This is what you do with it." She and Daniel went to Pueblo every Christmas for 11 years until Eleanor Walker came to Hawthorne instead and stayed for a month and declared the Nevada winter preferable to Colorado's, which was not objectively true, but which was her way of saying she preferred the company. They built a life that was not the life Willa had been walking toward. On that train platform, it was larger and louder and more argued over and more full of chalk dust and statute law and the sound of children discovering words they hadn't known before. It was a life that had been made peace by deliberate peace out of a decision to stay when leaving was certain. And every time someone asked Wilhelmina Walker in her classroom, at the courthouse, at the church social, at the porch, where she and Daniel still sat on summer evenings, with the heat doing its slow retreat, every time someone asked her how she'd ended up in Hawthorne, she told the truth. She said a man stopped her on a train platform, hat in both hands, and asked her to give the town a chance. And she'd given it 1 month, and the month had never ended. That was the whole story. That was exactly enough.